Welcome back, everybody, to the next episode of the podcast. We've got a slightly shorter, but still a fun episode here. NFL training camps have kicked off. There's a lot of contract news that has happened within the last couple of weeks. We will be reviewing the NFC North division. That'll be fun, especially for me because my team's there. We'll be going over the MLB trade deadline. We had some fireworks within this year's deadline. And then we will continue our little top 10 series as we'll be going through tight ends, power forwards, and first baseman. As always, of course, I am joined by Nickinator. If you want to say what's up.
Hello, everyone. I'm here. I don't plan on leaving, and I'm here.
Good. Okay, so let's not waste any time, and we will hop right into it. So before we get started talking about contracts and whatnot, I just got a Twitter notification as we were recording the intro about the Alvin Kamara suspension, and it says that he will miss the first 3 games of the season after an issue at the Pro Bowl in Las Vegas a couple years ago with a fight in a nightclub. So he'll be out. Jamal Williams' stocks are up. I just drafted Keandre Miller in a Dynasty League last night, so I guess his stocks are up for 3 weeks.
Yeah, I had no idea, so this is shocking news to me, but first initial thoughts is just they have Jamal Williams. I wouldn't be worried if I'm the Saints for at least the first 3 games.
No, the Saints are going to win 6 games anyway. Wink, wink.
Exactly.
So we've had a lot of new contract extensions for a lot of the young stars around the league. Andrew Thomas, Justin Herbert, Trayvon Diggs, and Quentin Williams all signed massive extensions with their teams, which aren't really surprises. Those are all very key young players. Can't blame those teams for paying those guys a lot of money, and good for those young guys for getting the bag. A new contract that kind of fascinates me, though, is the one that Saquon Barkley signed with the Giants, a 1-year deal for $11 million. This contract is a weird one because it seems like the issue that running backs are looking for is they want long-term deals, and I think the Giants were offering longer deals with more annual value. Obviously, I'm not in the building, so I can't confirm that, but I believe that's what was happening. So I'm a little bit surprised that Saquon went for the 1-year deal. I guess he wants to bet on himself. He thinks he can get the long-term extension. But with a player of his injury history, I think it is certainly a gamble, and I don't think the other running backs should be pleased about this. Look at Josh Jacobs, for example, who is holding out. He is trying to get the long-term deal from the Raiders. And the fact that Saquon Barkley kind of surrendered in a way, if I was Josh Jacobs, I wouldn't be too happy about that.
Yeah, but look, between all the drama that's happened with running backs the past few months, it's interesting to see a guy like Saquon Barkley take on such a short deal that's more or less the same amount of money he would have gotten from the franchise tag, just some of it got transferred to signing bonuses and incentives and whatnot. So I am curious to see what the future of Saquon on the Giants is going to look like. But along with Saquon, they did extend Andrew Thomas, which I really like. And there's a lot of players that you wouldn't think that would get big extensions, and they got them. Shannon Wilson from the Seahawks, Alex Highsmith, a stud that people don't really talk about a lot on the Steelers. Evan Ingram got an extension with the Jaguars. Titus Howard, a tackle that looked really bad to start and started to become actually pretty good, got an extension with the Texans. And I like almost every deal that has happened throughout the past month or so. I really like. It's just that Saquon deal is just really confusing. And when you see Ezekiel Elliott get cut, Dalvin Cook get cut, Austin Eckler wanted to trade, Jonathan Taylor wants to trade now, you have Joe Mixon taking a pay cut. It's interesting to see what's going to happen with Saquon going into next year, along with other big running backs like Jonathan Taylor, like Josh Jacobs, and it's going to be really curious to see how the running back market plays out.
So let's now take a look at the NFC North division. This is one of the most fascinating divisions in my opinion, not just because my team is here, but I think this is a division where these 4 teams could really finish in any order, and I wouldn't be that surprised. We'll start with the Minnesota Vikings. They won the NFC North last year. They won, I believe, 12 games, which is a whole lot. No, they won 13 games. They were 13-4. But there was always something off about this team. Most of their wins were super close. They were one of the best teams in the league in terms of winning in one-score games, which on one hand, it's nice to be winning those close games. But on another hand, it just felt like there was something off about this team, and that was proven in the playoffs when they got upset in the first round by the New York Giants. And over the offseason, they didn't necessarily drastically improve this roster, which I don't know how I feel about that for the short term. I don't necessarily think they made bad decisions for the long term. It seems like the new GM is really trying to get his guys here, make this team younger. So I think for the long term, it's not that they had a bad offseason, but I don't really think they got that much better. And along with them being shaky at times last year, especially towards the second half of the year, I don't really see how this team gets a whole lot better. And with other teams in the NFC North improving, that could be bad for the Vikings. I think their offense might be the best in the division, though. Certainly top two going into the season. Probably Detroit is the slight edge. But Minnesota's Kirk Cousins at quarterback. He's Kirk Cousins. He is what he is. He's probably the best QB in this division. But in terms of upside within the four quarterbacks, he might have the lowest ceiling for this season specifically. Minnesota let go of Dalvin Cook. I think that's a good move because Alexander Mattison slides into that running back spot. And I'm very confident in Alexander Mattison. I'm not surprised that the Vikings did not try to upgrade from him because I think he's pretty good. Whenever Dalvin Cook has been injured, Alexander Mattison has played really well. And now that he's going to be a full-time starting running back, I think he's going to be a good player. Minnesota has one of the best wide receiver trios in the league. Obviously, Justin Jefferson is a total stud. He was the best receiver in the league last year, won the Offensive Player of the Year. He's great. They had Jordan Addison. They have KJ Osborne, who's one of the better wide receiver threes in the league. That's a good group they have. And their offensive line is quite good as well. They have, I would say, a top 3 to 5 tackle duo with Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill. And then TJ Hawkinson at tight end is really good too. So I think the offense should continue to produce. It's really the defense that I'm a little bit worried about. Their defense was not good last year, and they're relying on a lot of young players to really step up. They signed Byron Murphy and Marcus Davenport to short prove-it deals, and they're going to be needing a lot of these second-year players that they drafted last year to take leaps. Brian Asamoah is going to have a bigger role. Lewis Seen is going to be healthy again. Andrew Booth Jr. needs to stay healthy and produce. Caleb Evans might play quite a bit. Same with Cameron Bynum. So I think the Vikings are really asking a lot out of these young defensive players. I will say they made a much-needed switch at defensive coordinator. They had one of the worst defensive coordinators in the league last year with Ed Donatel. Now they have Brian Flores, who's probably going to be one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. So if there's anybody who's going to be able to get this potential tapped out of these young players, I do think it will be Brian Flores. But on paper, the defense is not all that good, and I think this team could be looking at regression.
Yeah, looking at how this team performed last year, you see a lot of those one-score games, and you're like, if half of those flip, then you have a team like the Lions or the Packers running the division easily. And I think the biggest move that they made in this offseason was with the coaching staff, being Brian Flores becoming the new defensive coordinator for this team, going from, like you said, one of the worst defense coordinators to probably a top 3 defense coordinator, a guy who has head coach potential, and a guy who, when he was coaching the Dolphins, turned a abysmal defense to one of the better defenses. And when he left that team, what the Dolphins struggled with was defense. And they had to go get another defense coordinator. But with Brian Flores coming in here to Minnesota, I think he's going to take a lot of these young guys and turn them into solid players who are going to be able to perform. And you can take a guy like Daniel Hunter, who a couple years back looked like a top 10 edge rusher, who hasn't really been the same since. Even though he's been good, there's been issues within the organization from what we can see on the outside. But I think pairing Daniel Hunter with a defense coordinator like Brian Flores is going to be able to create sparks and just create fireworks for this team. I think getting Byron Murphy is really nice to help that secondary, who was abysmal last year. Harrison Smith is still here. He's older, not as good, but he's still solid. And then, like you said, a lot of the young guys in that secondary, Andrew Booth, Cam Bynum, Lewis Seen, Caleb Evans, Mekhi Blackman, I really like. A lot of those young guys are going to have to step up and try to help perform this defense, because last year this defense was just terrible, to be honest. The reason they had so many of those one-score games was the defense just couldn't get a damn stop. The offense was great last year, and that was the reason they were able to keep winning these one-score games, was Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson were able to make comebacks and win. Kirk Cousins led the league last year in fourth quarter comebacks because the defense sucked so much. He had to do all that. I think the offense is going to be doing the exact same thing it did last year, switching out Dalvin Cook for a guy like Alexander Mattison, who is really good. And whenever Cook was hurt, Madison was able to step in and perform pretty much the exact same, if not maybe better sometimes. And you take an aging receiver Adam Thielen and put in a lesser receiver like Jordan Addison to pair with Justin Jefferson, that sounds pretty damn good to me. And KJ Osborne is solid enough as a wide receiver 3. TJ Hawkinson, when he got traded to Minnesota at the deadline, looked really good. What pretty much Detroit wanted from him is in the beginning. The O-line has gotten better year by year and looks like one of the better units in football, I feel like. It's all going to come down to if that defense can perform and if Kirk Cousins doesn't fall off a cliff. I love me some Kirk Cousins. He's my boy. He can struggle at times. He definitely struggled in the wild card game against the Giants. But I am curious to see what he and second-year head coach Kevin O'Connell are going to be able to do together. I think going into his second year as the head coach, it's going to be real fun to see what he can do as the play caller and the head coach, see what he can do with Kirk Cousins and Jefferson, Jordan Addison.
One of the biggest surprises last year was the rise of the Detroit Lions in the second half of the season. As you all know, this is my team. I'm currently trying to walk the fine line between realism and optimism because I am quite high on what this team can do, but I'm also not trying to drink the blue Kool-Aid too much. On offense, the Lions should be really good. The biggest addition wasn't really so much an addition, but it was keeping Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator. He might be the best coordinator in the league right now. He was so good last year. He's going to be a head coach probably this time next year. I don't know how the Lions were able to keep him, but they do. And he has some new toys to play with rookies Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta. I think Laporta's going to be the day one starting tight end, and I'm super excited about Jahmyr Gibbs' role. I know a lot of people disagreed with this pick. I did not, more so because I was a lot higher on Gibbs as a prospect than other people. So that's why I was super behind it. I think him and Montgomery have very different skill sets in the backfield. I think they'll be able to complement each other well. David Montgomery is a better player than Jamal Williams. Jahmyr Gibbs is a better player than DeAndre Swift. So I think the run game is going to be even better than it's been. Obviously, we've got a great offensive line to block for these guys. And then Jahmyr Gibbs is a receiver. I think he's going to be able to add some value there as well. When we drafted him, I was really hoping we would use him in sort of a versatile way, kind of like a Deebo Samuel, and that's exactly what the Lions have done so far in training camp, lining him at receiver along with the backfield as well. He's a playmaker, how you get the ball in his hands, so give him the ball. The receiving core, I think, is a major wild card of this group. Amon-Ra St. Brown was the second highest graded receiver per PFF last year, only behind Tyreek Hill. So in other words, the dude can play. Jamison Williams, I think, is going to be a total stud once he comes back from his suspension. I'm not worried about him whatsoever. There are some people who seem a little bit concerned with him. I think that's baloney. I think he's going to be fine. The rest of the receiving core is not great, though. We do have some fine players, Caliph Raymond, Josh Reynolds, Marvin Jones. Those guys don't really move the needle for me, so we're certainly going to be relying on Jamison Williams a lot. But nonetheless, this team has a lot of playmakers for quarterback Jared Goff to throw the ball to, and Goff is certainly an interesting player himself because over the last few years he's really struggled. But last year he was really good. He has not thrown an interception in a very long time. The one issue I have with Goff, though, is he's a significantly better player at home. I'm a little worried to see how he's going to do on the road, but he's got the perfect situation around him. Great play caller, great weapons, and how could we forget this great offensive line? One of the best in the league. Frank Ragnow's an elite center. Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell are a top 3 to 5 tackle duo in the NFL. And then the guard play is pretty solid as well. So the offense should be really good again. It's very similar to Minnesota. The defense is the wild card here, but I think the defense has gotten quite a bit better. I think the defensive line is really underrated. I think people are hyping Aiden Hutchinson up a little bit too much, although I do think he's going to have a really good season. But the rest of the defensive line is not as bad as people think. Aleem McNeil entering his third season. He was legitimately good last year. I'm excited to see what he can do. Guys like John Kaminsky and Isaiah Buggs were sort of the unsung heroes up the middle. They were both quite good last year, being rewarded with contract extensions. I'm excited to see what Josh Paschal does in year 2. Romeo Okwara is a good player. Charles Harris has been a good player. Levi Onwuzurike is finally healthy. Maybe the Lions get something out of him. I think the linebacking core is going to be better with the addition of Jack Campbell, who I think is this team's best linebacker right away, over Alex Anzalone, Malcolm Rodriguez, and Derek Barnes, who are all going to be fine rotation players. I think the big X factor with this team, though, is the secondary. The Lions have a lot of new faces in the secondary. New outside corners with Emmanuel Mosley and Cameron Sutton. Sutton, I think, is a really good player. He's going to be very solid right away. Emmanuel Mosley's been a little bit banged up so far, but I think he'll be fine as well. And then we've got a really good safety tandem with Kirby Joseph and Tracy Walker. It's really nice having Tracy Walker healthy. He's super underrated. And then Kirby Joseph should be able to take a leap up in year 2. And we can't forget about Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Brian Branch, who are 2 super versatile DBs. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, I think, is the best player on the defense. He's really, really good. And then Brian Branch has had an awesome camp so far, and I think he's going to prove to be a guy who teams kind of overthought a little bit, and he really had no business falling to the second round.
Yeah, this team really just feels like the Minnesota Vikings, but they have a lot more upside than the Vikings do. I think Jared Goff has a much more higher upside than a guy like Kirk Cousins. He's starting to get up there in age, but I think after last year, pairing with another really good play caller like Ben Johnson and getting so many weapons around him, he's going to be able to produce. Like you said, the run game should, on paper, be better. Getting a better power back with Dave Montgomery over Jamal Williams. And Jahmyr Gibbs is just what everyone thought DeAndre Swift was going to be, except he shouldn't get hurt as much. The receiving group looks really good. Amon St. Brown's a top 15 receiver. Davis Williams has really good upside. Sure, he's going to miss a few games, but by the time he comes back, he's going to be in shape. He's going to be good to go. He'll be there. Marvin Jones, I really like on the Jags. He actually helped out a lot as like a slot receiver, and I think whenever you want Amon on the outside, just throw Marvin Jones on the inside, throw him in the slot, and he'll get you what you need. Josh Reynolds, like you mentioned, you liked a lot. Denzel Mims, a recent trade acquisition, could be something. They don't really have a jump ball receiver, and I think Denzel Mims could provide that sort of spark, but Denzel Mims hasn't really produced at an NFL level ever, so I'm not going to bank on that too much. The tight end room was really interesting. You had a few guys last year perform well, but second-round pick, I believe, Sam Laporta should be the day one starter. I think he has the most upside of all those guys, and I think Iowa tight ends are pretty good. So we'll see what he does, and it shouldn't go without mentioning this O-line is ridiculous. Probably them or the Eagles are probably 1 and 2. Maybe the Browns or Chiefs are up there, but this O-line is top 3, I feel. It's a fantastic group, and just the offense in general revolves around this offensive line, just like the Eagles, and we see what the Eagles have been able to do the past 10 years with a stout O-line. Given the Lions a stout O-line, they'll be fine. But like the Vikings, it's going to revolve this defense. And I think even looking at the Eagles, this Lions defense has a lot of pass rushers that I really like. Aiden Hutchinson, of course, is the big name here that a lot of people like. He probably wasn't as good as people think he was last year, but I think he was still good last year, and he should take that next step into becoming an elite pass rusher within the next 2-3 years. Looking at the DTs, there is a question mark with the guys like Ali McNeil, Levi Rizariki is a question mark. I do like Isaiah Buggs sliding into that spot, taking over for Levi, but we'll see what that DT duo is going to be able to do. And James Houston, a guy that no one really knows exists besides Lion fans and myself. He was fantastic as a rookie. He played only a few games, and I think he averaged over a sack a game, which is ridiculous. I think it was like 7 or 8 games he played, but I think he had like 8 or 9 sacks, which is ridiculous for a rookie. And if he can play all 17 games, and he can start all 17 games, he should be ridiculous. And you pair that with Aiden Hutchinson, and you pair that with this linebacker unit, which looks ridiculous. Malcolm Rodriguez became a stud last year, showing up on the TV show that I can't remember the name of. He was fantastic. Yep, that one. And Alex Anzalone, a questionable re-signing, especially after drafting Jack Campbell in the first round. But I do think he could be the veteran leadership you want in the middle of that defense with Malcolm Rodriguez and Jack Campbell. When people saw their first round last year, you see a linebacker and you see a running back. You're like, what are they doing? This is crazy. And no, I think these are both first-round talents. I think these are great players. I definitely questioned it at first on paper, but looking back at it, I really like what these picks are going to be able to do. I think Jahmyr Gibbs, within the next few years, should be a top 10 running back. And I could even argue that Jack Campbell might be able to do that. Jack Campbell is just a great athletic player, and he was one of the most athletic linebackers to come out of college ever. So that should be good news for them. But going into the secondary, this is the biggest question when you have almost every corner and safety is going to be new starters. Brian Branch probably isn't going to start, but he'll be starting soon when Tracy Walker leaves. Kirby Joseph started a good amount of games last year alongside Tracy Walker, and he performed really well, so it's going to be a question to see if he can perform going into his sophomore season. But the corner unit is going to be a question. Cam Sutton coming from the Steelers. Emmanuel Mosley, I really like going from the Niners to this Lions defense. I really like his play. It's just a question of if he can stay healthy. And then you have a guy, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, former Eagle. Love this man. It's going to be a question if he can stay healthy. He got hurt last year. He already got hurt once in training camp. He should be fine for the long term. But he played safety for Philly last year. It's going to be a question, can he go back to playing corner and perform at an elite level like he played safety last year? The Saints had him back and forth between corner and safety. Going to Philly, he played safety strictly because our corner unit was good. But this year in Detroit, he's going to be playing corner mostly. So it's going to be fun to see what he can do as just that pure outside corner along with Cam Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley. And it's just a lot of these young guys, these young pass rushers, even these young corners like Jerry Jacobs, Brian Branch, Afitu Melifonwu. It's going to be a question if all of these guys can perform, step up, and help this team who looked like they couldn't make a playoff last year actually make the playoffs for the first time since 2017, 2018, something like that.
2016, yeah. It's been a while.
Ooh.
So before we move on, you mentioned some names that I forgot to say, and I feel like as a fan of the team, I have to mention them. First is James Houston. He had 9 sacks and 130 snaps. I don't know if that's sustainable, but he was really good last year. And then Jerry Jacobs at corner. He's a dog. Let's move on to the Green Bay Packers. And as much as I love my Lions, I hate the Packers on the flip side. But I do find myself a little bit higher on this team than others going into the year, as much as I hate to say it. Jordan Love is the X factor of this entire team. How he does will determine the Green Bay Packers' future. And I think he's in a good situation. He's got to have 3 years under his wing behind Aaron Rodgers. I think he was a pretty good prospect coming out of Utah State. There's a chance he doesn't perform, but there's a chance he is really good as well. And he's got a decent group of skill position players. Certainly the most talent the Packers have had with their skill group in quite a while. They have a good running back duo. Aaron Jones hasn't really regressed compared to some of these other 2017 running backs like Kamara, Cook, and Mixon. Aaron Jones hasn't really lost a step yet. Christian Watson at receiver, I think he's going to take a big leap. He's very talented. They drafted Jaden Reed, Luke Musgrave, and Tucker Kraft on day 2, and their offensive line is really good. David Bakhtiari and Elgton Jenkins staying healthy is the big question, but if those guys do stay healthy, they'll be really good. Defensively, I think this team is probably the best defense in the division. Maybe the ceiling of Detroit's defense could pass them up. But the Packers have a good, solid unit here. Rashawn Gary leading the way with the defensive line and the pass rush. Kenny Clark is a good player. I'm curious to see if Devontae Wyatt and Quay Walker can step up. I wasn't overly high on either of those guys as prospects, but I do think they very well could improve. Eric Stokes is another guy who you're certainly going to have to watch out for in the secondary to see if he takes a leap. And then on the other side, they have Jair Alexander, who I would argue might be the best corner in the league. Rudy Ford at safety, I think, is a pretty underrated player as well. So I think if these young players can take the steps like Jordan Love, Christian Watson, some of these rookies, that I think they can, then I think this team could end up being a little better than people expect.
Yeah, looking at this Packers team, along with you, I am actually pretty high on this Packers team. And it's all going to revolve around Jordan Love. And if he can play average enough, this team could definitely make the playoff. If he can play just pretty much what Aaron Rodgers was doing last year, they could do something in what might be a weak division, depending on how the Vikings and the Lions turn out. But it's all going to revolve around Jordan Love. He has a stout running game with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon to be that running back, the power back, I should say. The receiving group is more or less the same. They got a lot more younger guys like Jaden Reed, but Christian Watson was a young stud last year, and I think he should only going to take a step up. Romeo Dobbs looked really good last year. He's going to get a lot more playing time. And then I mentioned Jaden Reed. He'll be in the slot. He looks like a real good piece for Jordan Love. They drafted 2 different tight ends, but right now it looks like Luke Musgrave is going to probably be the starter for week 1. And I do like that decision. I could see Tucker Kraft getting some snaps as like a tight end too, but we'll see how that plays out. The O-line should be healthy. Elgton Jenkins is going to be back. David Bakhtiari is going to get another full season. I like the other side with Josh Myers at center, John Runyon and Zach Tom on the right side. I do like what this O-line has, and it's going to be just keeping the O-line healthy with Jenkins missing nearly the entire season last year. But with the offense specifically, it's going to revolve around Jordan Love. If he can get the chemistry with Christian Watson, with Romeo Dobbs, Jaden Reed, Luke Musgrave, if he can stick to it and perform what we've seen him be able to do in the game against the Eagles last year, Jordan Love came in third quarter, and he played really well. He threw like a 70-yard touchdown to Christian Watson. Christian Watson did most of the work, but it was still Jordan Love played great against a top 5 defense against Philly. And then looking at that defense, just like the Lions and the Vikings, I feel like the defense is going to be the question mark. On paper, this defense looks fantastic, but the past couple of years, the defense hasn't been able to perform to what you would expect. Kenny Clark is a top-tier defensive tackle, and you had Rashawn Gary miss a lot of the year last year and still hasn't fully recovered from his injury last year. Devondre Campbell isn't getting any younger, but he's still pretty good. Preston Smith is on the outside, but he's still old and isn't Zadarius Smith. They drafted Lucas Van Ness, but he's probably not going to start week 1. He might come in later into the season. Devontae Wyatt, we'll see if he can progress to be another DT along Kenny Clark. Quay Walker, he has a lot of character concerns, but he does have some good play as a player. So I want to see what he can do if Rashawn Gary can come back. You mentioned Rudy Ford, and you didn't even mention Rasul Douglas. Both of them go Birds. They are great players. Rudy Ford has been a great special teams player in the past, and I think getting a chance to start is going to be great for him. Rasul Douglas, since Jordan Green Bay, has been fantastic. You mentioned Jair Alexander. He's a top 3 at minimum corner. Eric Stokes after the first round looked like a bust for a little bit, but he's performed pretty well. That I think he's good. The safety group is a little questionable. Darnell Savage hasn't performed the past couple of years. Rudy Ford, pretty much his first time starting. I do like him though. Go Birds. But it's going to be a big question of if this defense can perform to the expectations that they have, if Rashawn Gary can come back. And again, it's going to revolve around Jordan Love and if he can play to the potential that he has.
Last but not least, we have the Chicago Bears. This is a weird team to me because they were really bad last year, and they could be better. They could also stink again. And similarly with the Packers, it really revolves around the development of their young quarterback, Justin Fields. And Fields is an interesting player because a lot of people are super high on him going into this season. I don't really see what he has shown through 2 NFL seasons as a passer to suggest that he's going to take a super big leap. That doesn't mean he can't, though. This is what I said last year about Jalen Hurts, and I was proven wrong. I like Justin Fields a lot more as a prospect than Jalen Hurts as well. I think he's got really good arm talent, and here entering his 3rd season, I do think breakout is very possible as a passer. It's just that we haven't really seen as many flashes as I think there's people suggesting, but that doesn't mean he can't be really good. I had him as the 3rd quarterback in that draft. And if not for there being 2, in my opinion at the time, blue chip talents at QB, I would have been comfortable picking him number 1 overall. As a runner, he's obviously dynamic as well, and I think this run game, dependent on the offensive line, could be one of the best in the league. Justin Fields is obviously a dynamic runner, maybe the 2nd best rushing quarterback in the league right now, behind probably Lamar Jackson. And then out of the backfield, they've got a really good group of players. Khalil Herbert has been pretty solid through 2 seasons. Deontay Foreman, he's the most underrated player in the entire NFL. He's really good, and nobody talks about him. Nobody, not even the league, really views him as some big-time player. So because of that, I don't really know how the Bears are going to use him, but he's really good. And then Roschon Johnson in the 4th round is also a good player. Plus, they have Travis Homer, who's fine in his own right. At receiver, they add DJ Moore, who, is he a legit number 1? I don't know, but with him being your number 1, you feel a lot better than you did about your top guys being Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool, who now become more so secondary receivers, which I think that role suits those guys a lot more. Cole Kmet at tight end, they signed him to a pretty big extension. I think he could be looking at possible breakout. He's only 24 years old. And then the offensive line is not horrible. I'm curious to see how these players develop. Tevin Jenkins looked really bad early on in his NFL career, but he slides over to guard, and he has played a lot better. Darnell Wright's going to play right tackle. They drafted him 10th overall. I did not think he was a top 10 prospect, but I do think there's some talent there. And then defensively, they had the worst defense in the league last year, but I will say they've really done a good job of improving their weaknesses. To the pass rush, they added Yannick Ngakoue, who they just signed, I think, yesterday. Up front in the middle, they draft Gervin Dexter and Zach Pickens in the second and third rounds. At linebacker, they signed Tremaine Edmonds to a big deal. They signed TJ Edwards. He's a pretty good player. At corner, they draft Tyreek Stevenson, who I thought was a really underrated prospect. I think he's going to be really good right away. Plus, they have Kyler Gordon, who's entering his second season. And then the safety tandem was the only strength of the defense last year with Eddie Jackson and Jaquan Brisker, who are both back. So I think the defense should be quite a bit better. The offense could be pretty good depending on a Justin Fields breakout. I think the ceiling for this team is winning the division, but they need a lot of things to happen for that to really be the case. So because of that, I would not count on that happening. But I do see a world where they are last year's Jaguars. I just think it's less likely than a lot of people are making it out to be.
Yeah, realistically, this team isn't going to be able to do much when it comes to playoffs or especially championship aspirations. But this team's main focus is developing their young players and taking that next step forward into not being the worst team in the league. And then all starts with Justin Fields and just him progressing as a passer. In previous years, especially with Jalen Hurts, I did not think he'd be able to become a good passer. I did not think he'd be an elite talent NFL quarterback. I was especially proven wrong. Even he's on my own team, I was proven wrong. But Justin Fields, after watching Jalen Hurts, I'm going to try to be a little more optimistic, and I want to see what he can do with a lot more receiving talent on the field. Jalen Hurts gets his A.J. Brown, becomes a way better passer than he was last year. You get Justin Fields, DJ Moore. DJ Moore isn't A.J. Brown, but that's still a lot better than having Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool as best receivers. So getting a guy like DJ Moore for Justin Fields to help him out is going to be phenomenal. Darnell Mooney, I do like him. It's just a matter of he's not a number one receiver. So putting him at the number 2 or even in the slot is going to be a lot better for him. Chase Claypool is going to be your jump ball guy. Go get up and get a ball. That's his role. I think he's going to be solid in that role. They did give a lot more than you would want to get him, but I think he's fine in that role. And you mentioned the running game with the Justin Fields. That it just explodes the running game entirely. But Khalil Herbert is young and has a lot of talent. Dante Foreman, one of your guys, we love him, both of us. He's a fantastic talent. Played great on the Panthers last year after they traded CMC. So that duo between Foreman and Khalil Herbert is going to be great. Cole Kmet signed a recent extension. He should be really good. And the O-line, after being abysmal last year, is going to look on paper a lot better. Tevin Jenkins, you mentioned, is a lot better at guard. Cody Whitehair is getting older, but is a good center. Nate Davis is a free agent signing, is a great guard. And then they drafted Darnell Wright, top 10, to play the right tackle position. I don't think he's the top 10 talent, but I do think he could be solid. But again, like every team in this division, the defense is the question mark. They got Yannick Ngakoue, they get TJ Edwards, Tremaine Edmonds, they get all these players. It's going to matter of just if they can all come together and perform. The corners is the big question mark. Jalen Johnson looks like he could be somebody, but it's a question of if he can take his talent and become extremely good. You mentioned the safety duo. Jaquan Brisker looked really good last year. Eddie Jackson, after regressing with age, just went back to his 2018 form and played phenomenal. They drafted Tyreek Stevenson, Jalen Johnson, I mentioned. Kyler Gordon did not perform very well last year. Between the 2 second-round picks they had with Brisker and Gordon, Brisker was really good and Gordon was pretty bad. But I do like Kyler Gordon being able to sit behind Tyreek Stevenson and Jalen Johnson and let him be in that slot role and just do what he knows what he can do. The linebacker unit looks really good. Tremaine Edmonds is one of the most athletic linebackers in the league right now. TJ Edwards, go Birds, was fantastic for us last year. So in a Bears defense, he's going to be able to sit in the middle and kind of just do his thing while Tremaine Edmonds runs around everywhere. They drafted Noah Sewell, one of my guys in this previous draft. I think he could be somebody to be that third linebacker. Right now, their third linebacker is Jack Sanborn, who I don't really know if that's who you want, but I do think they could have Sewell be there eventually. The pass rush is still a question mark. Gervin Dexter, Zach Pickens are great picks. They signed Yannick Ngakoue, but right now the starters just aren't. You don't want those guys to be starters normally. Yannick Ngakoue is solid. He's not 2017, 2018 Yannick Ngakoue, but he's still a good player. I'm shocked he ended up only going to the Bears, but this is probably just to show what he can do, get traded at the deadline, get some more picks. That's probably what this is going to be, which I do kind of like for the Bears. Just go get more assets for your team. But realistically, this team isn't going to go too far. But again, it's just going to be developing these young players and letting Justin Fields come into his own.
So if I were to rank the 4 NFC North teams right now, I think I would say, at least on paper, Lions, Vikings, Packers, Bears. If I were to predict the order right now, this is subject to change. I'm going to go Lions, Packers, Vikings, Bears. And my bold prediction here is that all 4 teams finish within 5 games of each other.
I could go many different ways for me predicting who wins the division and who finishes last. But I'm going to try and be a little bold here. I'm going to say Packers win the division, with the Lions and Vikings being second and third by probably a game, and the Bears finish just below 500.
All right, so that's our preview of the NFC North. I hope I'm right and you're wrong, or else otherwise I am going to cry. Next up, we're going to take a look at the MLB trade deadline and talk about some of the moves, winners and losers, and all that stuff. The MLB trade deadline is now done, and we are all hands on deck for the final couple months of the year, and thus the playoff race. The trade deadline ended up being fairly exciting. We did have some pretty big moves. Some teams really seem to be going in certain directions, and I think those are often your winners. Teams who pick a direction and stick to it. One of those teams being the New York Mets. They trade Max Scherzer, they trade Justin Verlander, and I think they got good value considering they traded older pitchers who are regressing on big contracts. Luis Angel Acuna is an awesome prospect for the Rangers, and they got 2 of the Astros' top 4 prospects for Verlander. Now, they're going to have to pay part of those deals, but Uncle Stevie's got all the money in the world, so I think he can absolutely handle it. I think the Texas Rangers are also winners. They're going all in. I respect it. They were able to keep their really good prospects like Evan Carter, and they made a bunch of solid additions to the team. Jordan Montgomery, Max Scherzer, obviously Aroldis Chapman a little while ago. As for losers, I don't want to just mention my team here, but not trading Eduardo Rodriguez is a massive L for the Detroit Tigers. I feel like they could have got something really good to bolster the farm system, and that is not what ultimately ended up happening. I think some other teams, especially the middling teams who should have sold stuff, are losers. Minnesota standing pat makes no sense. They should have picked a direction, whether it's to buy and try to compete for the division or go and sell. Cleveland selling was certainly interesting, but I think they made out really well. They got good value in the trades they made. They got Khalil Watson in exchange for Josh Bell. Watson has had his ups and downs, mainly downs since he got drafted, but he is still a highly regarded prospect. And then Aaron Savale to the Rays for Kyle Manzardo feels like a total fleece. Manzardo, I think, is a fringe top 30 prospect in all of baseball, so I think Cleveland ended up making out really, really well in terms of the pieces they got for their farm system. And speaking of the Marlins with the Josh Bell thing, I like that they also went in a set direction. They gave up some good prospects to get players, but I like that they're going for the playoffs. You had Jake Berger, and Josh Bell, who I think are going to be 2 good pieces for their offense, which offense seems to be the need for Miami. So I think I would certainly throw them as a winner as well. And then my last team I'll mention is the Yankees. What are you doing? They stood pat. They shouldn't have. Again, pick a direction, which they did not do.
Yeah, I think the biggest winners is probably just the Rangers and the Mets. The Mets get rid of a lot of their bigger contracts. Sure, they have to pay them, but I don't think they're going to be mad about that. I'd rather pay them and go get prospects than pay them and still finish under 500. But they got some really good prospects. They got some of the better prospects in the Astros organization, as well as Ronald Acuna's brother, which if he becomes anything like Ronald Acuna is right now, as a Phillies fan, I would hate that. The Braves didn't do too much, but they're going to be mostly getting back all of their hurt players like Kyle Wright and Soroka. The Phillies went out and got another starter, which I am ecstatic about. I mentioned a good 2 hours before the Michael Lorenzen trade happened that I would like to get Michael Lorenzen because our 5th starter is nobody, and our ace, quote-unquote, Aaron Nola, has a sub-100 ERA plus. So getting another starter is fantastic. His first start as a Philly went 8 innings, so I'm happy about this. The Marlins went out and got hitting, and they did a lot more than I thought they would do. In our prediction thing, I had them getting Eloy Jimenez, and they were linked to him, but I guess they couldn't get a deal done and settle for Jake Berger. So I was real close with that one. But the one thing I'm shocked at is that the Reds and the D-backs, they were pretty quiet, which is a little shocking. I thought both of those teams would go out, try and find some pitching, and they just didn't. I think the Reds only got one player, and it was a bullpen arm, but it's not like a big name so much that I don't remember who it was. And the D-backs, they got, I think, Tommy Pham, which sure is a decent player, but they have a pretty good outfield. Corbin Carroll, Alec Thomas, Lourdes Gurriel. So they don't really need another outfield arm, which is just questionable, I guess. The Padres kept all their players, mainly, which is pretty nice. They got a few other players. I forget who they were. I can't think of them, but they got players. The Cubs went from sellers to buyers in about a week's time, going 8 in a row, winning some games, getting Candelario from the Nationals, keeping guys like Cody Bellinger and Marcus Stroman, hoping for them to carry them into a possible wild card spot with such a weak division. They're only 2.5 games back. The Reds are half a game back. So it's going to be curious to see who comes atop of that NL Central division. The Brewers didn't do much, even though they're going for that division spot. The Orioles were linked heavily to Dylan Cease. The White Sox probably wanted like 50 top prospects and I don't even know. They wanted Heston Kjerstad. They wanted G-Rod. I don't know who they want. So the Orioles had to settle for Jack Flaherty, which I do like. I think it's not the ideal situation with him being a free agent at the end of the year, but I think they would have wanted more a guy that is under contract for a little bit, like a guy like Dylan Cease. But Jack Flaherty, at least in his first start as Oriole, looked pretty good, and I think if you can re-sign him, that's a good starter, and I think going into the offseason, they're going to be going for pitching big.
So let's now go over some teams who have been kind of streaky throughout the past few months. The Tampa Bay Rays have really quietly not been very good over the month of July. The Orioles have passed them up for first place. I still think the Rays, amongst the AL East, have the best chance of making a run this postseason, but that is a little bit of a concern. The Arizona Diamondbacks as well, they have kind of fallen back down to earth, which isn't really a surprise. I know both of us were really high on the Diamondbacks going into the season, but realistically, they're a young team. They're good. I think they do grab one of those 3 wildcard spots, but I think they're still a little ways away from really making a run in the playoffs. And then the Giants, even though on paper they may not be the most talented team, that team finds ways to win games. So seeing them back in second place really is not that much of a surprise. And then the Dodgers are the Dodgers. The Cubs are a fascinating team as well because I think we both picked the Cubs to make the playoffs at the beginning of the year. I know I did, and for a while it looked like we were wrong, but it seemed like they finally turned a corner. They added Jeimer Candelario amongst others. So they could be a team who makes a run during the second half of the year, especially in a shaky Central with the Brewers and the Reds not being like sure things. So the Cubs very well could make a run and maybe surprisingly win the division.
Yeah, after a month of July that's kind of where you settle and see what teams are going to be buyers and going for those playoff spots and what teams are going to be sellers. There was a lot of teams that you thought would be, or would have been clear playoff candidates, and they started to struggle. The Rays in the month of July won 8 games. I did not stutter. I counted. It was a whole 8 games that the Rays won. They are now 2 games back from the Orioles. The Blue Jays are right behind them. They're 7.5 games back. Red Sox, 9.5. Yankees at 5 games above 500 are 10 games back, sitting 57-52 at the time of recording. Aaron Judge should be back within the next few days. So we'll see what they can do. But as you mentioned, they didn't really do anything during the trade deadline. And now you're kind of sitting here like, hey, what are they going to do? You want to win games, or do you want to just make the playoffs? Maybe even miss the playoffs with how good the division is, and not do anything for the next half a decade. The AL Central and NL Central are just the cluster of mediocrity. The Twins were leading the division. They still are, and they didn't do a damn thing. The Guardians, who I thought if they bought could win the division, sold, and they still could win the division. And a team like the Tigers, who are awful, could still win the division. They are 7 games back. That's how bad the AL Central is. The AL West, it is a thing to see the Angels go out and buy. They get Lucas Giolito. They're 4th in the division. They're 7.5 games back from the Rangers. They probably won't make the playoffs, but it'd be nice to see them make the playoffs, see Ohtani in the playoffs one time before he goes to the Dodgers or the Astros or Yankees or something. Mike Trout's still out for a couple months, so probably not going to make the playoffs. But in the National League, it's mainly just Braves are going to win the division. It's the Braves. The Phillies have started to get hot again. They just won a series over the Marlins. The Marlins got a new closer, and he blew 2 saves. The NL Central is something. As I mentioned, the Reds, Cubs, and Brewers are all within about 2.5, 3 games of each other. So any one of those 3 teams can win. We both had the Cubs making the playoffs, and They're third, but now that they're hot, they could definitely do something. We've seen things in the past where a team in this own division, the Cardinals a few years back, went off. They won about 18, 16 games in a row to win the division after looking like they might miss the playoffs. West Padres are climbing back to 500. They're almost sitting in mediocrity. The Diamondbacks have fallen down to earth. The Giants, who looked like they would be fourth in the division, they're somehow only 2.5 games back of the Dodgers, which is something. And the Dodgers are the Dodgers. They figured it out eventually.
So with that, we will hop into our fun and game segment as we'll be continuing our top 10s within certain position groups. For today's edition of our top 10s, we'll be ranking our top 10 tight ends, first baseman, and power forwards. And we'll start with the tight end position. I've got Travis Kelce at number 1. Not really debatable. I have George Kittle at number 2. Maybe a little bit more debatable, but chalk. After that, I think the next 5 guys are sort of in the same tier. My order is Mark Andrews at 3, Darren Waller at 4, TJ Hawkinson at 5, Dallas Goedert at 6, and Kyle Pitts at 7. I think Pitts at 7 might be the most hot takey here. I think a lot of people are going to have Kyle Pitts ranked higher, which is weird because I'm like a super big Kyle Pitts truther. And I think at the end of the year, there's a good shot he's going to be as high as 2nd or 3rd. But right now, I don't think he's as all-around of a tight end as those other guys who I put ahead of him. Number 8, I've got Pat Freiermuth with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I feel wrong having Pitts and Muth one spot like next to each other. I think Kyle Pitts is closer to 3 than he is 8, but that's just kind of how the ranking goes. Number 9, I have David Njoku with the Browns, and then number 10, I have Evan Engram with the Jaguars, with Dalton Schultz being the guy who I kind of wanted to put on the list, but I don't think he's better than any of those 10.
Yeah, I think we have the exact same 10, just in a pretty different order, actually. The one thing that stayed the same was Travis Kelce at 1. That should be without a doubt. Number 2, I do have Mark Andrews. George Kittle has been hurt the past couple of years. Last year, he wasn't as good as he has been in previous years. And Mark Andrews has been fantastic for pretty much his entire career. And I'm willing to put him at 2 over Kittle. But I do have Kittle at 3. I don't think he's going to be bad or anything. I think he's fantastic of a player. It's just he took a few steps back the past couple of years with some injuries, but it happens. 4, I think TJ Hawkinson. He was fantastic since joining Minnesota. Number 5, a little bit of bias comes out of me. I have Dallas Goedert. And this is where I get a little bold, we'll say. Number 6, I have Evan Engram. I think he was fantastic with the Jaguars. And I think he's going to take another step up with Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk. And Trevor Lawrence taking another step to becoming a potential top 5 quarterback. Number 7, I have one of the more underrated players in the league. I feel like David Njoku at 7. I think he's a fantastic tight end, and I think he's one of the more all-around tight ends. He's good at blocking. He's good at catching the ball. Number 8, I have Darren Waller. He's taken a couple steps back the past few years. He's been hurt. I think you see, Darren Waller got traded for a 3rd-round pick. What? That's steal. Really, he's over the age of 30. He's been hurt the past 2 years. He hasn't had 1,000 yards. In 2 years. So he has taken a couple steps back, and he probably, in terms of passing, downgrades from Derek Carr to Daniel Jones. But that's not a knock on him. That's just, I'm not a Darren Waller guy. Number 9 is where I have Kyle Pitts. I think he hasn't produced is my big thing. And there's a raw talent. He's probably top 4 at minimum. But he hasn't been able to produce. Sure, he hasn't had good quarterback play. But DeAndre Hopkins never had good quarterback play, except for 2019 Kyler and the 2 years he had Deshaun Watson. So it's a question mark on if he can even perform in the NFL, and I want to see Desmond Ridder bring that out of him. I want him to be good because he's a fantastic player, but it's just we haven't seen it yet. And then number 10 is where I have Pat Freiermuth. I want to see him take the next step up along with Kenny Pickett and becoming one of the better quarterback tight end duos. But that 6 through 10 range, I'm aware, is a little bold. But I do think looking at it, at least in the way that I have said everything, I feel like makes some sense.
Let's move on to first base now. I think I went really bold with the order. I didn't go bold number 1. I have Freddie Freeman. He's the best first baseman in baseball. I don't think that can really be argued. But 2 through 6, I think there's going to be some surprise with this order. Number 2, I have Matt Olson with the Braves. He's had a fantastic year. He's really, really good. Number 3, I have Pete Alonso with the Mets. He's been one of the most consistent hitters in baseball over the last 4 years, really, maybe even 5 years at this point. Number 4, I have Yandy Diaz. This guy is really good, and he's been really good for a while, but this year he has been on another level. I have Yandy Diaz ahead of Paul Goldschmidt and Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who come in at 5 and 6. Goldie and Vlad are good. Neither of them have lit the world on fire this year. Yandy's been significantly better than both of them this season. You can easily count the reputations of Goldie and Vlad to put him above Yandy Diaz, and I wouldn't really argue with that. But at this point, I think Yandy Diaz is a better player than them. Number 7, I have Christian Walker with the Diamondbacks. Good power bat, good glove. Number 8, I have Nathaniel Lowe with the Rangers. All-around good lefty bat. Number 9, I have Josh Naylor with the Cleveland Guardians. Other than Jose Ramirez, he's really the only other guy on that offense who is legitimately a good player. And then number 10, I had a slightly hard time with this spot. I decided to go with Ryan Mountcastle with the Baltimore Orioles. There was a small part of me that wanted to put Tristan Casas up here, but I'm not quite ready to do it yet.
There was a lot of things that you said that are actually fairly similar to my list. The main thing being Freddie Freeman at the top. I feel that should be a given. Number 2, I have Paul Goldschmidt. I think after the start of the year, he was pretty bad, but he remembered how to hit a baseball. He won the MVP last year, and he's still a fantastic player. I kind of would have liked the Cardinals to trade him just to see him go try and win a World Series, but we won't get to see that. Matt Olson, I have at 3. He's fantastic. If you want to switch him and Paul Goldschmidt at 2 and 3, I wouldn't blame you. And then at 4, I'm right there with you. I got Yandy Diaz at 4. I have him above Vladdy. I have him above Pete Alonso. Maybe that's the Philly in me talking and having him above Pete Alonso, but I'm not a big fan of Pete Alonso. I have Vladdy at 5, Pete at 6. It's just Pete Alonso is not the greatest fielder in the world, and most first basemen aren't. But for whatever reason, maybe it's probably just the Philly in me, just knocking Pete Alonso. But he is a very good hitter, and I want him to not resign with the Mets, and I want him to go anywhere else. Number 7, I have Christian Walker. Number 8, Nathaniel Lowe. I'm right there with you. I think both of those guys are one of the more underrated players on 2 probably playoff teams, and they deserve a lot more love. Number 9, one of my guys, I have Ty France. He hasn't lit the world on fire, and one of the more underknown players, especially for a Mariners team that's underperforming this year. But I do think he's really good. Number 10, I have Josh Naylor. He's, again, one of the only good players on his team, along with J-Ram. And you mentioned Tristan Casas. I really wanted to be the one that mentioned Tristan Casas. Tristan Casas is really good, and there's not much else about him that I want to say. But he is just a really good player, and I don't know if he could win Rookie of the Year because of the plate appearances he had last year, but he was fantastic this year.
And now let's move over to the power forward position. Positions in basketball are a lot more subjective, and I've been using Basketball Reference to determine the positions. I'm pretty sure some of them have changed, though. Some of the players who we ranked on our small forward list are listed at power forward. I'm not putting them here, though, so I had to be a little bit creative. Number 1, I've got Giannis. Pretty easy decision here. You can argue Giannis is the best player in the world. Number 2, I have Jason Tatum. He is also a true legitimate superstar. I don't think those top 2 spots are really debatable. Number 3, I have Zion Williamson. I get the health is the issue, but when he is on the floor, he is so damn good. Number 4, I don't think Pascal Siakam gets enough credit as like a legit top 20 player in the league, but the guy's really good. Number 5, I have Jaren Jackson up here this high. He won the Defensive Player of the Year. He's an asset offensively. I think he's really, really good. Number 6, I have Julius Randle. Yeah, say what you want about him, but the guy's a good player. He gets the job done, even if he did struggle in the playoffs. Number 7, I'm listing Karl Anthony Towns as a power forward. The Timberwolves have Rudy Gobert at the 5, so we're going to have Cat at the 4. He's a gifted offensive player, gifted shooter. Number 8, I've got Evan Mobley. He has turned into a great young player with the Cavs. I thought he was always the second best player in that draft. Jalen Green never should have gone ahead of him, and through 2 NBA seasons, that still holds to form. Evan Mobley is fantastic, especially defensively. Number 9, I have Jeremy Grant. Should the Blazers have signed him to an $150 million deal? No. Is he a good player? Yes. Number 10, I wanted to put Paolo Banchero here. He had a phenomenal rookie season with the Magic. But for right now, we're going to go with Aaron Gordon. He's a championship-level role player. He was probably the 3rd best player on the Nuggets. You could argue Michael Porter Jr. was a little bit better, but I think Aaron Gordon's more important to them. Other than Jokic and Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon was the 3rd guy for the Nuggets, in my opinion. So we're going to throw him here at number 10.
Yeah, like you mentioned, and we've mentioned every other time we've done our top 10s, basketball doesn't really have positions anymore. So some of these are kind of hard. Like I even had a guy at 10 who was apparently a small forward, and I didn't realize that. But regardless, 1 is Giannis, 2 is Jason Tatum. That should not be an argument. Giannis is probably 1 and 2 with Jokic for the best players in the league right now. And Jason Tatum is one of the best young superstars. He's probably a top 10 player, and he's just fantastic. You mentioned Pascal Siakam is probably a top 20 player. I'm right there with you. I have him at 3. I have him above Zion, who I have at 4. Zion is just one of those guys where it's really hard to rank, or when he's on the court, he's a fantastic player, probably a top 20 player. But he just hasn't been healthy last year, ever, really. Last year, when he was healthy, the Pelicans were the 1 seed. And when he wasn't healthy, they were not the 1 seed. They definitely weren't. So you want him to be healthy. You want to see him play. But when it comes to ranking him, it's just really difficult. 5 is where I have Evan Mobley. I'm really high on this guy. I think he could be one of the better big men in the league. I think he is fantastic, and I'm putting him above a lot of other players that you had above him. And I think he's going to be able to take the next step up and to be just fantastic. Number 6 is where I have Jaren Jackson Jr., Triple J. After winning Defensive Player of the Year, being one, he gets all the blocks, he gets all the rebounds. He's fantastic. Number 7 is where I have Julius Randle. We like to make fun of him. We like to think he sucks. But he's still good. He's not like the best player, but he's still pretty good. Number 8 is where I have Cat. I did put him as a power forward just because he's not a typical center. It makes more sense, at least to me, if he was a power forward. Number 9 is where I have Paolo Banchero. I was willing to put him in the top 10. I think after a fantastic rookie year last year, he's just going to take another step up, and he's going to be one of the best young players in the league. And number 10, I'm right there with you with Aaron Gordon. I think he was great last year with the Nuggets, being that third guy for them. And in some games where only one of Jamal Murray or Jokic were stepping up, you were seeing Aaron Gordon do what he needed to do. He was being the role player. He was being the third guy with those two. And he was doing the small things that he needed to do to help them win the championship.
So there you go. Those are our top 10s, and that'll wrap up the episode. A pretty fun one here. If you have any final words before we sign off, feel free to let them out.
Not much to say. Just Tristan Casas is really good, and let the Phillies get hot and win a World Series.
All right, so that'll wrap it up. I hope you all enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe here if you're new. Next episode coming out pretty soon. We're certainly going to be ramping up with the NFL season starting up within the next month as well, so that should be fun. Peace out. Go Lions.